Hello IFO audience, welcome to another episode of IFO Classroom, and today we'll be visiting New Zealand. In this very special episode, our students won't be separated by the screens anymore, but actually will be physically here together in this very cozy classroom. And we'll be learning about English and linguistics from a top university in New Zealand, the University of Otago. So right now, live from Otago. Welcome back to IFO Classroom, live from Otago. Today's lecture will be joined by Dr. Simon Overall and Dr. Michael Cobb, two English and linguistic lecturers from the University of Otago in Dunedin, New Zealand. Hi, Dr. Michael and Dr. Simon. Can you introduce a little bit about yourself?
My name is Simon Overall. I'm a lecturer in linguistics here at Otago University. I'm originally from further north in New Zealand, from Auckland. I moved to Australia for a while to do my PhD, and I've been back in New Zealand here at Otago for about 6 years now. My research is on languages of South America. Mike.
Thanks, Simon. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Michael Cobb. I'm a senior lecturer in English here at Otago. I completed my PhD in how stories can repeat themselves using narrative theory to describe the phenomenon. I teach early modern English literature, so that's things like Shakespeare, but I mostly teach student writing and composition. And I research how successful students tend to write. And I have a very large data set of about 10,000 students, and I look at English diagnostics and what it means to be a successful student at university.
Thank you, Dr. Simon and Dr. Michael. And we also have another special guest today with us. So toward the end of the class today, we'll also have a Q&A session, and joining us will be Mr. Lân Bùi, a current master's student in the University of Otago. He is currently studying linguistics there, and he's gonna help us shed more light into the studies. Welcome, Mr. Lân Bùi.
Hi everyone, I am Lân, and I'm the Master of Arts student at Otago University doing linguistics. And my interest is in the field of second language acquisition and social linguistics. I'm very keen to introduce you guys to my past research here at Otago.
Thank you, Mr. Lân. And also we have our classmate here physically together in this very cozy classroom. Classmates, would you like to say hi to the audience? Hi.
The University of Otago is the first university in New Zealand with a heritage of 154 years. This university is ranked in the top 1% of the world's best universities and has the highest possible rating of 5 stars plus in the ΔÜİC Global University Performance Ratings. It has many subjects in the top 50, 100 or 150 of the world's best universities, such as dentistry, tourism, anatomy and physiology, food, English language and literature, education, pharmacy, to name a few. 95% of Otago graduates go directly into work or study further. Otago graduates are recognized for their interpersonal and negotiating skills, conceptual and analytical skills, and independent judgment. Otago students are taught by national award-winning lecturers. For 7 of the past 10 years, Otago lecturers have beaten all other universities and polytechnics to win the Prime Minister's Supreme Award for Teaching Excellence. In 2021, Otago lecturers won 4 out of total 9 awards nationally. The University of Otago's Central Library, one of 9 libraries at Otago, is ranked 13th best library in the world. Its Dunedin campus is recognized as top 5 world's most beautiful campuses. The university also have genuinely world-class teaching and research labs, performance spaces, lecture theatres, study areas, and sporting facilities.
All right, now without further ado, let's start with the lecture. I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Simon and Dr. Michael.
Today, we want to talk a little bit about some language myths. We have a lot of rules of language. People often learn about grammar and they think, oh, there's so many rules, it's so complicated. Our hope is that we can use linguistics and we can use Mike's expertise in teaching writing.
Thanks, Simon. We'll go through a few examples with you today of common rules that we see in style guides, and then we'll apply it more generally to linguistics and how language is used in reality. One of the language myths we often hear is that you always need to write complete sentences. And this is something that relates more to a discourse community. So a discourse community is when a group of people are together and they have common beliefs or they have common interests, and therefore they also have common rules and common expectations. So we'll relate that to when you text. Now, can we apply this rule generally? We must always write in complete sentences to texting. I would suggest that we probably don't frequently write in complete sentences. Even this one that people will accept as a complete sentence isn't grammatically complete for a couple of reasons. And we'll look at a few reasons why that might not be a complete sentence. So here we have a very standard structure for an English sentence. We have a grammatical subject, we have a verb, and then we have the object of that verb. And we're a subject-verb-object language.
I would like to say something about that in English. We generally put our sentences in the order of subject, I, verb, have, and object, Electra. This tells us which is the subject and which is the object. Not all languages work that way. Linguists like to look at languages from all around the world, and we can put the subject, verb, and object together in different orders. Subject, object, verb, verb, subject, object. There's a lot of variety.
And so today we're speaking more specifically about rules that apply to English or what's expected in an academic setting. But of course, that will vary depending on languages. So this comes back to discourse community. You should always think about what it is that's expected of you when you communicate. Now, most complete English sentences will follow that pattern. And then what else we find in the sentence is just more information. So in this case, this morning just tells us when the lecture is, and it's an adverbial.
We can just say, I have a lecture, and that's a perfectly good sentence on its own.
Right on. And if you were texting, you might reach for what we would consider grammatically incomplete sentences, like see you soon, or where we have a verb, but we have no subject. Or you might try for something more like hope you're okay, which again, we have a verb to hope, but we have no subject. Or even talk to you later. And these are really common expressions in English, so common that most people wouldn't recognize that they're ungrammatical.
Absolutely.
And perfectly acceptable when you're writing in this context, right? So what we understand from those bits of language is see you soon probably means I will see you soon. But this is really context dependent because you're in a chat with someone specific and they know when we say see you soon that it's probably me that's talking about it.
Context. Absolutely essential.
And similarly, if we're texting and we say hope you're okay, it's likely that we're saying I hope you are okay. Or when we say talk to you later, it's of course I will talk to you later. Now, it's important to recognize though why this might be grammatically incorrect for an academic setting, because when we take away the grammatical subject in English, we make a command. No, not all languages work that way.
No, absolutely not. But this is the rule in English. And so when we're writing in English, we need to take care to follow the rules.
Yeah, nice. So here, take care, or meet me after class, or stop by later, they're all commands for your listener to do something. Right? In this case, take care is a command for you to do something. Take care of yourself. Or meet me after class is a command for you to come, or an invitation for you to come and see me. Or stop by later is a welcome, more or less, right? Now, we mention this by way of thinking of what style guides tell you you need to do or that you should do, and recognizing that sometimes these things are really, really arbitrary.
Absolutely. The rules can be broken in the right context, but then they also need to be followed in other contexts.
Right. So one of the ones that we hear frequently is that you should never split infinitives. And this is a long-standing rule that we have about how you should write any grammatically complete sentence or grammatically correct sentence.
An infinitive consists of the particle to and then the verb. But put their non-finite verb form. It's the form that has no tense marking on it, the plain basic form of the verb. We can have a look at a few examples. To go, to eat, to smell, to be. Any verb can take this form.
That's right. And it doesn't tell us when the action's happening
or who's doing it.
That's right. It's non-finite. Now, I'm giving you one of the really, really, really popular style guides. There is a precedent from the 14th century downward, so we could see that this rule more or less might have been existing for 700 years. For interposing an adverb between two, so the particle to in the infinitive, and the infinitive which it governs, so the verb. So putting something between two and say go, or to and smell. Mm-hmm. And what Strunk says is, but the construction is in disfavor and is avoided by nearly all careful writers. So the idea here is that if you split an infinitive, you are an uncareful writer. You're not a very good writer. And for our discourse community, being at university, it would be expected that you don't do this.
You want to be a careful writer. You want to be seen to be a careful writer.
For a variety of reasons. Because you will get a better grade, for example, if you follow this rule. Or people will think that you know how people of a certain group should speak or should. So the application of this rule would be something like this. We can see that we have two infinitives and we have something in between those infinitives. Mm-hmm. So to not split, the infinitive is to, the particle to, plus the verb split, and we have a word in between, not. And in the second infinitive, it's the same thing. We have to consistently please. The infinitive is to, the particle to, the verb please, and we put an adverb in between, consistently. Now, Strunk would say that this is wrong. You shouldn't do it. You'll stand out like a sore thumb if you do it in your academic papers.
Not a careful writer.
Right. So we can see the split here of the infinitives. And what the suggestion would be is students should try not to split. So we take the word that's between to and the verb, and we put it on either side of the verb phrase. So we could see that the infinitive remains in one piece, to split, and to please is together by itself. So what we thought we would do now is we'd get you to practice this rule, and we'll look at where it comes from. So my beloved students in front of us, could you take a moment and see if you can find the infinitives in these three examples? And once you find the infinitive, take the word that is in between the infinitive out and move it to one side or the other. Take a minute now. Go.
I think the split here is the patiently between the to and sit, so I would move it to the right, making it Ming was not able to sit patiently for the whole lecture.
Does someone want to try number two?
I think I will change it to she decided never to stop though.
Well done. So we have never splitting the infinitive to stop. Good. How about number three?
I would say that I will change the not before the to, and I will have the sentence, yet she hoped not to need another example.
Excellent. Really well done. Now, according to Strunk, this is how you would have to write. He's prescribing something that you need to do. If you don't do this, you're not a careful writer, which might mean that you're not a good student and you won't get good marks. But.
What do linguists say about this? Strunk is prescriptive. This means that we've got rules that are being prescribed. Linguists in academic contexts, like me, would generally think of ourselves as descriptive. It means we're talking about how things are. So the prescriptive approach gives us rules that can guide our formal style. And it aims to produce clear and accurate communication. Descriptive approach to linguistics asks, how do people actually use language? What are people actually doing with language? And it covers all styles and all registers. So we've already seen one example is if we're texting with our friends, we don't need to worry too much about these formal rules. But if we're writing an application letter, if we're writing an academic paper that we want to be published or to get a good grade, then we want to look at these prescriptive rules and we're going to need to follow them. So linguists will say, these rules are real, these rules are important. They're one part of language use. And in fact, we can see all kinds of language use when we look more broadly.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, even though I teach prescriptive rules, I agree with Simon in that language comes in all shapes and sizes. And even if you play back this video of us talking, you'll probably find that both of us who know these rules will split infinitives at some point or another, because that's what happens, right? That's how language is used.
It's a different context.
That's right. And also you would be able to understand us regardless of whether we split that infinitive or not. So it works as rules like this work as a symbol for whether you belong to a group or not. And it's all these little symbols that add up to show that you are a member of that group and might result in you getting a job or...
Precisely. It's like wearing a tie to the job interview.
That's exactly it.
Now, interestingly, when we look at the languages of the world, and there are many languages in the world, in some languages we find that what we'd call the infinitive is just one word. And we can look at an example here, comparing those English infinitives that I gave you with Latin. And Latin is a language that for a long time was very important for the English-speaking world, for the academic world. And we can see that those forms in Latin consist of just one word. So there's a question here. Perhaps Latin and other languages inspired this rule in English against splitting the infinitive. Perhaps the idea is, well, we actually want to make English look a little bit more like Latin. In fact, wherever these rules may have come from, we do have to remember that it's important to follow them in formal writing. Language use, as Mike has already pointed out, is extremely sensitive to context and expectations. We have different kinds of language that we use in different contexts, and we have different expectations of the language we're going to use in different contexts. Now, it's a little bit like wearing football colors. Wearing red or wearing blue, neither of those in itself is going to make me a better football player. But if I'm on a football team, I'm going to want to make sure that I'm wearing the same color as the rest of my teammates. Otherwise, I'm going to have a really hard time scoring a goal.
So another one of these rules is ending sentences with prepositions.
Oh, I love this one.
Do you want to Winston Churchill for me? What is this rule that we're talking about? Well, just ended with a preposition. The rule we're talking about. Prepositions. Prepositions are the small words that
they generally express something about time or place, and prepositions are followed by a noun.
That's right. Here's what the Chicago Manual of Style says about this rule, and it is critiquing it. And this is one of the Chicago Manual of Style is the one that we use in the English department. Now, it's really important to recognize that there are many manuals of style that you might be using at university. Chicago is one of them. APA, the American Psychological Association, is another. Modern Language Association, the MLA. Vancouver is another style that you might be using. Harvard. So it's a little bit like changing your clothing depending on what you're doing. You change your style guide depending on which lecturer you're talking to. The traditional caveat of yesteryear against ending sentences or clauses with prepositions is an unnecessary and pedantic restriction. So it recognizes that it's an arbitrary rule that's imposed on us when we write in academic English. Also, it goes as far as to say, and it is wrong. A sentence that ends in a preposition may sound more natural than a sentence carefully constructed to avoid a final preposition. And this is interesting. Who thinks it sounds more natural?
Who wrote the style guide?
Who wrote the style guide? That's exactly it, right? The rule prohibiting terminal prepositions was an ill-founded superstition based on a false analogy to Latin grammar. So again, Latin comes into play here.
Absolutely.
You know, Latin was the language of the educated. And you want to be associated with the educated, so you speak like the educated do.
And in Latin, there is a strict rule that a preposition must always be followed by its noun or pronoun.
Right. So let's take a look at this, where we end with a terminal preposition. So this is the case I told you about. And part of the reason why we might teach this rule when I'm teaching writing or composition is you have to start thinking about what word the preposition governs. So what does, in this sentence, what does about relate to? So in this case, if you were to recast the sentence, you would put about earlier in the sentence because you don't want to end a sentence with a preposition. This is the case about which I told you. And one of the things that the style guide suggests is it might sound more natural. This is the case about which. Well, now you have to think, what does which refer to?
Well, which is a relative pronoun. It's referring back to the case.
That's exactly right. So we have two more examples here where we're ending with a preposition. And when I'm teaching writing or composition, these are the type of sentences that I would suggest you avoid. And there's a reason for it other than ending with a preposition, for preposition's sake. So who is this example for? Or I don't know who I'm going to give it to. Now, the problem with ending with a preposition here is you have to go, same process, go back and think, what does this preposition govern? In both examples, it relates to who, and who.
It's a question word.
Right. And it's a pronoun.
It is a pronoun.
And with our pronouns, we have both subject and object pronouns. So ending with a preposition might make a grammatical difference to the earlier part of your sentence. So in these instances, you might want to recast your sentences as bringing the preposition forward to have for whom is this example. And we could see that in the original sentence, we used who, but when we bring the pronoun forward, we think, I probably need whom, or I don't know to whom I'm going to give it. Now we're going to look at why we would need who versus whom, and this is a grammatical difference.
Who is the subject, and we know what a subject is. Subject is roughly the one who's doing the action for the most part. Whom then is the object. And if we have our subject, verb, object construction, then we can see we've got the subject first and the object last.
And the object receives the action often.
Often.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at the other pronouns in our set, I, you, he, she, we, they, those are the subject forms of our pronouns. And when we change them to object, we get different forms: me, you, him, her, us, them. So we have distinct forms for our pronouns in English between the subject and the object. Now, when we look at a sentence such as, who should we punish, whom should we punish? Sometimes it's unclear which form should we use. Should we say who or whom here? How can we answer that question? Well, a really good way to get an idea of which form we should use is to try rephrasing that, replacing who or whom with another pronoun. So for example, if we turn this into a sentence, we should punish he or we should punish him, which of those would be correct?
Well, I'm going to go for him.
I'm going to go for him too.
but I know the answer, so that's...
We should punish him. So if we were to put a personal pronoun in there, it's quite easy to see this should be him. It's the object form, and we can see that also because it follows the verb.
Right. And so we can return to our initial question and then put in the proper form so that we get
Precisely.
Yeah.
Whom should we punish?
Whom should we punish? Again, so bringing it back to our rule about ending a sentence with a preposition, I don't know Is it who or whom this package is going to? So when we end with the preposition, we have to go back and now think, what does the preposition govern? So in this case, it governs who or whom. So, and we know that a preposition, what follows a preposition is generally a pronoun, and it's probably going to be
In the object case.
the object case, right? So we could try recasting this sentence. We can shift it to this package is going to he or him, and we know in this case that him would be correct. So we should use the object pronoun, whom. Subject pronouns usually don't follow prepositions. It's a pretty easy rule to remember. Or we could recast the sentence completely, bringing the preposition forward. I don't know to who or to whom this package is going, and we would pick whom.
Easy in this case. It's coming straight after that preposition.
And that's part of the reason for that rule. We bring, if the preposition is earlier in your sentence, you're probably going to get it correct. So it's one of the reasons why you don't end a sentence with a preposition. However, as I said earlier, when we were talking, I ended several sentences with prepositions, and you could still understand me. And even if you used the subject pronoun instead of the object pronoun, everyone would understand you, because that's what people do frequently in language.
And speaking.
Yeah.
Speaking is very different from writing. Context is so important. When we're speaking, we have this context. We have the shared information. We have the conversation we're in. When we're writing, we don't have that context. We don't know who's going to read our writing. We don't know what they're going to be doing, what they already know. We have to be clearer. We have to provide that context for them.
That's right. So let's try this. There are 3 examples here. Can you see which is the preferred pronoun here, who or whom?
For the first sentence, I would say, whom did you speak to?
That's right. And that, I like the way that you chose, you left the preposition at the end. So whom did you speak to? Or you could recast the sentence so that you have it in the, where the preposition, or sorry, the pronoun follows the preposition.
Yep.
Great. You could have to whom do you speak. How about number 2?
I think who is speaking now.
Yeah, excellent. It's a it's a subject that we need there. Who is speaking now? Excellent. And how about number 3?
I think the correct answer would be I do not know for whom the remark was intended.
Really well done. So yeah, I like that you recast the sentence there. So you made it so the pronoun follows the preposition, and that's the reason, one of the reasons for that rule, right? So another one that Strunk emphasizes positive statements. So what Strunk says is make definite assertions. So don't use, and then I just used a negation. Don't use a negative statement. Avoid tame, colorless, hesitating, non-committal language. He really does not like negative statements.
Does not.
Use the word not as a means of denial or antithesis, never as a means of evasion. So thinking about negative language, when you have not in your sentence, you always increase your word count. So if I was teaching this in my composition class and my students say, well, why should we avoid not? I would say, well, often you're up against word counts. So your instructor may say, do you write an essay of 1,000 words?
Oh, I do that.
Yeah, so do I, right? And so you're always trying to cut out words. And every time you use not, you're adding a word to your word count that could be replaced by something that's more precise or shorter. So when we negate in English, for example, we add 2 words every time that we use not, because we add the auxiliary verb to do.
Absolutely.
Right. So do not forget is a negation. It's negative language that Strunk is against. Just end with the preposition again. But you could be more precise by using a positive phrase, like remember. There are a lot of things you can do instead of not forgetting, but remember is more precise in terms of what you're asking someone to do. Or do not leave. What do you mean? Do you mean stay here? Do you mean remain? Or do not accept? Do you mean reject, decline, refuse? So every time you negate a verb in English, you add 2 more words to your word count, and these add up over the course of an essay. And you can find a one-word verb that's usually more precise. This applies to adjectives as well. If you're saying it's not cold, do you mean it's warm? Do you mean it's hot? Do you mean it's tepid? There's going to be a phrase that's always more precise. Not cold can mean any number of things other than cold, right? Absolutely. And you're adding, again, 1 word to your word count. Or not ugly. Do you mean that they're handsome? They're pretty? They're beautiful? They're comely? They're so-so? What do you mean by not ugly? And the same holds true for adverbs. If you say something happens not often, does it happen sometimes, or rarely, or often, or frequently for that matter? So when I would if I were to teach this in a composition class, one of the reasons I would suggest this is word count. Another one is tone. So instead of having a negative word in your sentence, you keep the tone more positive by taking the negations out.
We can see that in the first example, do not forget.
Yeah.
It's focusing on the negative outcome. Remember, it's focusing on the positive outcome. That has an effect.
It totally has effect. But again, this is relatively arbitrary. Do people always notice this? Is it necessary? Will you be misunderstood?
Unlikely.
Unlikely. Right. So examples. And these are examples from Strunk himself. Mm-hmm. So, for example, he was not very often on time. And we could see in both cases, he did not think that the use of that studying Latin was much use. So when you have negations in there, you usually have to recast the sentence. You have to find a more positive word for the negative phrase, and then you might have to recast something else in the sentence. But usually what happens is your sentence shrinks. So as opposed to he was not very often on time, well, what was he? He usually came late. Or he thought the study of Latin was useless. Now, unlike the other examples that we gave, splitting infinitives, where you just need to move 1 word, or ending a sentence in a preposition where you can move the preposition forward, here you usually need to have a greater command of the language. You need to know synonyms, and you need to be able to recast the sentence, which is what we're going to ask you to do right now. There are 3 examples here, all of which have a negation in them. Can you change those sentences so you get rid of the negation?
I think I would change number 1 to Tom frequently skips eating his breakfast.
Yeah, that's completely a possibility. Tom seldom ate his breakfast, or Tom frequently
skipped eating his breakfast.
That's right.
For example.
Excellent. And you notice, of course, that the sentence shrinks when you're doing that. What's interesting for me, though, is in asking you to do this exercise, with the split infinitives, it was quick, right? With this, it's more of a cognitive exercise or an exercise in language. You have to shift how you're thinking about a concept. Is it positive or is it negative? And you also need to have
come up with different words to fit in there. This is a question of style as much as of grammar.
That's right. Good. Would someone like to try number 2?
I think it's Sarah was short.
Yeah. Certainly, Sarah was short, but there are a variety of things that not tall could mean. It could mean she was medium height.
Yep.
Or she was really, really tiny. Good. And what's interesting about this is your answers will differ from our answers simply because the negative isn't very precise. It could mean a variety of things. Someone like to try number 3?
I will change the sentence in Eugene Miller.
Right. So that's a good example. It could be any number of things. We chose the verb meandered in that it's what's that?
There's a lot of verbs.
There's a lot of verbs you can choose
slowly.
Yeah. She did. Eugene did not walk quickly. Eugene ran. Eugene crawled. Eugene meandered.
Anything other than walking quickly.
That's right. Anything other than walking quickly. But one of the things you'll notice is in each one of these examples and your good responses, the sentence shrunk.
Yeah.
Good. So in terms of arbitrariness, this is a really good example, the use of commas. So coordinating conjunctions and independent clauses. Would you like to speak to coordinating conjunctions or independent clauses?
Independent clause has our verb and its subject and its object if it's there.
That's right. So independent clause is the easiest way to think about it is it's a sentence that can stand by a sentence on its own.
A coordinating conjunction then, as it suggests, it conjoins, it brings them together and it coordinates them. So it says, these two things are true. Put them together.
Yeah, exactly. Now, with to remember the coordinating conjunctions in English, I give you the mnemonic fanboys. So we have 7 coordinating conjunctions in English, and they are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So the mnemonic fanboys is just an easy way to remember those 7. Now, this is a rule that you'll find actually still today in most style guides, how you should place commas. So I sang a song. This follows the standard pattern for English sentences.
Subject, verb, object.
Yep.
There it is.
The subject, sang the verb, and the object. What did you sing? A song. And then we have a second independent clause. She put on the jukebox. Now, if you were to join those 2 sentences with a coordinating conjunction, almost every style guide that I know would suggest that you have a comma after the first independent clause. This is pretty arbitrary, and we'll come to the arbitrariness of it in a moment. Right? I would suggest that comma is there probably because after an independent clause, we normally have a stop anyways.
We have a slight pause.
Yeah.
Take a breath. Come up with the next clause.
Yeah, and if we had an independent clause by itself, we would have a stop there. We'd have a full stop to show that it's the end of a sentence.
Correct.
Yeah. So another example of an independent clause, you crossed my mind, sentence by itself, but you didn't stay there, coordinating conjunction, but you would have a comma after the first independent clause. And again, most style guides will say this is what you should do. Try those examples now and see if you can get the comma in the right place.
For the first one, the comma would be placed right before the and, which would separate the clauses. I am not a perfect man, comma, and I will not be a perfect president.
Perfect answer.
Barack Obama. Really well done. How about number 2?
For question number 2, I will place comma before and. So I have that really tie the group together, comma, and that has spelled pen on it.
Yeah, really well done. And how about number 3?
I think she completed medical school, comma, so she's a doctor now.
And it's little symbols that show that you're part of a discourse community. And again, this is a little bit arbitrary. Someone could have come up with the rule, for example, put a semicolon there. Yeah. Which we do with a conjunctive adverb, something like however, moreover, or therefore. But for this, when we use a coordinating conjunction, the expectation is that you'll have a comma. And it's funny, when we're marking assignments, that's just one of those things to think, oh, our student did that. And your estimation grows a little bit in our mind. Again, though, it's just because you can follow a rule that is somewhat arbitrary. What do linguists say about this?
Being part of the team.
Yeah.
What do linguists say about this? Well, got a bit of a summary at this point.
Yeah.
There are about 6,000 or 7,000 languages spoken in the world today. That's a lot of languages. Today, we have looked only at English and a little bit of Latin. Now, every single language has its own rules and its own conventions, like these rules we've been looking at. And every single language is used in all sorts of different contexts in all sorts of different ways. I mentioned early on, linguists like to be descriptive. We want to understand how and why people use languages in the ways that they do. And again, there's any number of reasons why people might say things in a particular way. Also need to look closely at our own use of language. So my students of linguistics, as well as studying some of the 6,000 or 7,000 languages in the world also need to look at their own language in terms of their own academic writing, as we've been talking about. Oh. Context and expectations are always so important in any kind of study of language. So we've looked at context in terms of what's going on around us, and particularly when we're writing language, we need to make sure that we provide all the context necessary so that our reader, and that reader might be 100 years from now, that reader might be on the other side of the world, that reader needs to be able to understand what we mean with our language. We need to be a bit more careful. We need to follow certain rules.
And one of the things that I like about this point is expectations. So one of the key things about writing and language use is meeting the expectations of your audience, right? Now, I always encourage when I'm teaching writing for you to find your own voice. But is your own voice the most effective in every single situation? So you also have to think about, what is your goal? If your goal is to get a better mark, then you probably want to reach out and use the voice of the person who is going to give you that mark.
Precisely.
Even though splitting infinitives is absolutely arbitrary, if your marker expects that you will not split infinitives, then you should probably meet those expectations.
Take that into account.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing that I like about expectations, the rules we've talked about, they're not all strictly grammatical rules. That is, if we break them, as we've talked about, we can still understand things. We say, oh, it's not entirely wrong. It's expectations within a particular context, within a particular discourse community. So we've seen sometimes those prescriptive rules, sometimes they're not so important. If we're texting our friends, if we're chatting, even when we're giving a presentation, we might not follow these strict rules that we'd follow when we're writing a formal paper.
And on that point, I mean, imagine for yourself when you're texting your friend, if you were started writing incomplete sentences all the time, your friend would probably think it was odd. And there are reasons for that because, you know, you're trying to save time a lot of the time. When we were growing up, text messages, you had to pay for the message depending on how many characters you had in it. So often you would have...
Oh, we used to shorten those words.
Shorten them as much as you could, right? One of the interesting things that my students have expressed to me, in my diagnostic tests, what we're finding is fewer and fewer students are using full stops when they write a sentence by itself. And, you know, I've asked my students why they do this, and they say, well, when you put a full stop on the end of a text message, it sounds angry. So again, context is really important.
Is absolutely important. And these are the contexts we've talked about. If you are writing your academic paper, if you are writing something that you want to publish, if you are writing a letter for a job, you need to make sure you're wearing the right uniform, showing that you're a member of that team.
Yeah.
So I have a question. In Vietnamese, and I imagine a lot of other languages as well, you did mention that there are rules that are, you know, different in between each languages. There are certain phrases that are grammatically correct and meaningful in Vietnamese, but they might not be as so in English. And so, do you have any tips for, you know, English learners or linguistics students in general to avoid these grammatical mistakes or, you know, misinterpretation?
Oh, that's a great question. So,
before we get a technical explanation on that, I'll talk about it from my own language learning.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So one of the things that helped me the most, I went to a French university. So I didn't speak English during my undergraduate degree before I started my PhD. And one of the things that was most helpful for me was not trying to translate. So translating was the problem because I started putting English syntax over top of French syntax, which didn't always work. So if I was able to think in the target language, I was much more likely to be successful. Now, that's not a technical explanation, but that was what was really handy for me. Pass it to Simon for perhaps a better specific explanation.
Better or different?
Different, yeah.
One of the, you know, who would probably be more of an expert is Lan, who studies this stuff.
Yeah.
I'll have a little go at an answer. Precisely as Dr. Kopp has pointed out, if we try to translate from one language to another and we translate each word one by one, then we're going to come out with something more often than not that doesn't sound right in our target language. So what we need to do is think about what are the constructions, the larger constructions that are used in our target language. What are the larger structures that we want to try to approach? And one way that, again, going from my language learning to approach that is to try to learn phrases and sentences in larger units. And then we can start to apply the rules later. But if we've got those larger units, that can really help us to get some more natural sounding language coming out early on before we get that idea of not needing to translate.
Yeah, I mean, my students often ask me this question when I have a second language learner in my composition classes. They'll suggest how can we make this, how can I be more grammatically correct?
Mm-hmm.
And there's an interesting relationship between readability. So the ability for someone to read your sentence easily. And that's sentence length generally. There are a couple of factors. One is the word complexity, so how long the word is, sometimes measured by syllables, sometimes measured by word frequency, how often it occurs in a language. But the other factor is sentence length. So I always suggest just keep your sentences short. If you can stick to the English is an SVO, language, subject, verb, object. If you can stick to that relatively simple structure and have small chunks in the subject space, the verb space is usually constrained anyways because our verbs can only be so long, right? And then the object space, you're generally going to be more readable and you're going to have less of a chance of making errors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then again, sentence length again relates to readability. So if you avoid, you can't always avoid, but compound and complex sentences, independent clause plus independent clause or independent clause plus subordinate clause, then you're less likely to make errors. Of course, there's a limit to that because your writing will start to sound stilted. It'll start to sound very formulaic if you do that, but that's an obvious way of avoiding errors, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Dr. Simon and Dr. Michael, I don't know if you've noticed, but throughout your lecture, our students have been taking notes, a lot of notes, and I'm sure they have a lot of questions for you, so be prepared. But before that, I'm just gonna give them a few minutes to gather their questions. I'm just gonna take my privilege and ask you the first one. What is the most common application for linguistics in real life?
That's a great question. Do you mind if I take this one?
No, go for it.
One application that we've already seen is this idea that we can use linguistics to help guide us in our language learning and to guide us in our language use in formal contexts. We can also see more broadly, I've mentioned that we have 6,000 to 7,000 languages in the world today. Many of those languages have very little study, they've been very little described by linguists. And so to me, one of the most important applications of linguistics is to study those languages, and that way we can also prepare educational materials for speakers of languages where there is very little educational material available at present.
Thank you so much for the answer. And now students gonna have questions for you. First one will be me.
Hello, my name is Hadley. Can I ask Mr. Lum, please? So currently I'm still an economics student, but I'm very interested in linguistic study, and I would love to study abroad about linguistic study. So Mr. Lum, can I ask you to tell us a little bit more about the research that you have done in your linguistic study at Otago, please?
Hi, thank you for your question. So most of my research has been focused on the domain of teaching and learning material development. So basically, in 2021 and 2022, I was examining the set of three English textbooks published by the Ministry of Education and Training in Vietnam. And the differences between them was in 2021, I was looking at speaking activities in those textbooks, if they are balanced, if they are well balanced, well distributed, stuff like that. And with the same set of textbook in 2022, I was looking at pragmatics for agreement and disagreement strategies. And we think of agreement and disagreement as like, I don't agree with you, I like your ideas, stuff like that. So we might sometimes learners, teachers, and even institutions who write those kind of material overlook such strategies. And for this year, I wish to unlock the potential of the postmodern picture books as learning resources for intermediate adult learners. And at the moment, we are at the beginning of the beginning stage. So hopefully I can make some valuable conclusions that can contribute to the field.
Thank you for your answer. I really appreciate it.
Hi guys, my name is Thành, and I have a question for Dr. Simon and Dr. Michael. What are the emerging topics in this area?
Yeah, well, in my field, an emerging topic in research or in general would be using AI, artificial intelligence, to help you write. And, you know, a lot of people are resisting this, and I'm all for it. I've used ChatGPT, I've trialed it out, and it writes really, really well, extraordinarily well. It can't be human because it's so much faster than a human, right? It doesn't pass the Turing test for me on that point alone. But the problem, why you need to understand rhetoric and understand language is things like ChatGPT and AI will produce a really sleek document. But is it what your expectations and your context demand, right? So this is an emerging field now. How good or how effective is ChatGPT? It's exceptionally effective at churning out documents that look very similar, or it actually can change quite a bit and do it well, but you need to know what the prompts are to get it into the right shape that you need it.
Absolutely.
Emerging, so AI and ChatGPT really will affect the way we write, but I also think in many ways it will normalize or make everyone write in a very similar way, because it has a distinct voice right now. I mean, it's constantly changing, and it's going to get a lot better in terms of sounding like someone different each time, I imagine.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up ChatGPT. I tested it out, asking it about some languages that I've worked with that are quite understudied languages, and these are minority languages, endangered languages. One of the most important emerging topics in linguistics is this idea that actually for a long time linguistics was focused on European languages, English, and we've talked about how Latin was so important. And relatively recently, we've started looking beyond European languages and looking at many more of the thousands of languages in the world, and many of those are endangered languages. And I think it's really important for us to continue that work describing these languages and understanding these languages. They tell us a huge amount about what it means to be a human, because language is so central to the way humans think and the way humans interact in our societies. And we often find in little known languages these particular features that we didn't know were even possible in human language, but there they are.
That is so interesting. In fact, do you want to say anything?
Thank you very much.
All right, and we have another question from our students here.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jin and I'm currently a sophomore in university. And just by majoring in international studies, I have a huge passion for languages. And I want to give my question to Mr. Lung. So Mr. Lung, what are the most exciting parts of your research findings?
So as I said, you would find like very interesting stuff and unexpected stuff while doing research. And the journey and the endeavor of doing a research, one research can change dramatically from like the beginning towards the end of the research journey. So yeah, that is mind-blowing for me so far.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello everyone, my name is Han and I'm from Public University, and I have a question for Dr. Simon and Michael. What quality of student need to be successful in this area?
That is an excellent question, a very practical question. I like it. I'm going to start this one.
Yeah, go for it.
For me, I find for the sort of linguistics that I teach and the linguistics that I do, there's a lot of problem solving, a lot of looking at data and finding the patterns. So one of the qualities that is great for a student to succeed in linguistics is to have that ability and that delight in finding patterns and following up ideas and discovering new things that we may not have thought would be there. And remember that everybody has a language. We all use language. So you'd think, oh, we already know everything about language. So one of the most interesting things and one of the things that makes a student successful is that ability to find the interest in language, even when you think you might have already known it all.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you hit almost any discipline I could think of. It's finding patterns. You know, that's what research is. You're putting together a puzzle and going, oh, okay, now I could see how everything fits together. And along with that is being open-minded. You know, I see this quite frequently. People, it must be this, but take a step back and just look at it from an open perspective, and you'll.
That absolutely is.
Thank you very much.
Well, I myself is also a student of the English faculty, so definitely I'm very intrigued by your lecture. I think I would give my small question for Mr. Lung. You know, do you have any advice for me or for students out there also majoring in English linguistics like me?
So there are 5 that I would say. So the first one will be develop a strong foundation. So basically the language foundation. You need to be able to grasp all the grammar, the vocabulary, the phonetics, everything of that target language that you are, that, for example, English, that you are trying to work with. The next thing is that linguistics is a very broad field, and it's not a thing that Vietnamese parents would well regard it in Vietnamese context. So you can look at the subfields of linguistics. For example, social linguistics, psycholinguistics, computational linguistics, and they will lead you to a unpredictable future, but exciting one. For example, I've never thought of myself doing second language acquisition. And the next thing will be engage in research, because you would never be able to know everything about anything. So that's a big thing. And the last one will be, you should cultivate a strong analytical and critical thinking skills to be able to basically learn everything, to learn anything, I would say.
Yes, thank you. I'll definitely take it.
Wow, and that was very eye-opening and insightful. Thank you so much for the Q&A session. And I would love to continue this conversation on and on and on, because it's so interesting, but time is finite, and so we're approaching the end of our classroom today. Before we go, I would like to send our thank yous to all of you. Dr. Simon and Dr. Michael, thank you so much for your invaluable insights and your sharings and your expertise. It has been wonderful to hear from you. Thank you, Mr. Lân Bùi, for sharing with us and joining us today. Your sharing as a linguistic student has been very valuable and inspiring to us all. And hopefully more and more Vietnamese students is gonna be encouraged to pursue a degree in linguistics in the future. And thank you so much for all of our classrooms today, for our classmates. And last but not least, I would like to send my thank yous to all of you watching us from afar. Thank you, IFO audience, for tuning in for another IFO Classroom, this time live from Otago. Until next time, we'll see you again. Goodbye! If you are keen on pursuing a linguistic or any other program at the University of Otago, please feel free to check out the Otago official website at www.otago.ac.nz.
Vice-Chancellor's Scholarships for International Students. For international students who have not previously been admitted to the University of Otago and who are planning to undertake full-time, full-year undergraduate study in 2024. Scholarship value, $10,000 New Zealand dollars for tuition fees, University of Otago entrance scholarships. For international students who have completed Years 12 or Year 13 in a New Zealand school, or the University of Otago pathway. Scholarship value, up to $30,000 New Zealand dollars. For more information on these scholarships, please visit the website linked down below.